Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza, the surefire #1 pick in the 2026 NFL Draft. Mendoza led the Indiana Hoosiers on an undefeated 16-0 season in a national championship victory. He threw for 3,535 passing yards, 41 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. Oh, and don't forget his Heisman Trophy, too. Needless to say, a very successful season for Mendoza and the Hoosiers, and now Mendoza can turn his attention to the NFL and the draft, where the Raiders are sitting at #1 overall and will no doubt take Mendoza come April. So just like I did with Arvell Reese, check out that video if you haven't already by the way, we are going to dive into Fernando Mendoza as a prospect and talk about his strengths, weaknesses, and how I project his future as an NFL quarterback. But before we get into it, be sure to like and subscribe for more NFL and draft content. The Combine is this week, and I'll start putting out some positional rankings as well at some point. So if that interests you, subscribe and you won't miss those future videos. So with that being said, let's get into Fernando Mendoza. So let's start out on a positive note with the strengths I see in Mendoza's game. First off, Mendoza's size is easily that of a prototypical NFL quarterback. Standing at around 6'4", 225 pounds, he's got that prototypical NFL quarterback size that a lot of #1 pick quarterbacks have lacked recently, such as Cam Ward and Caleb Williams, who were both around 6'1", and of course, Bryce Young, who was barely 5'10". And paired with that size, Mendoza has got some decent mobility. He's not one of these old school tall quarterbacks who are statues in the pocket. Mendoza can certainly take off and move, although it will be less effective in the NFL for sure. Another thing that Mendoza has that you can't teach is the very solid arm talent. He can reach every part of the field with his feet set, and while it definitely isn't the strongest arm, it is around above average for NFL standards, which is more than enough. All these intangibles certainly add up to a quarterback who can be a franchise guy, and it sets a nice floor for him. Another attribute that sets a high floor for Mendoza is his accuracy. At every level of the field, he is accurate. This certainly doesn't mean his accuracy is perfect, more on that later, but for the most part, he can hit his guys in stride deep and can place throws depending on where the defenders are. He made multiple big throws throughout the season and into the playoffs on that national championship run with Indiana, and you most likely tie his good accuracy to his very solid overall mechanics. His footwork is always super solid, he gets lined up to his target, and has a very nice, easy throwing motion. And in terms of processing, I do have my concerns, but that I will get into later, but I do think he has some pretty good overall timing. There are plenty of examples where Mendoza throws with really good anticipation, and while I think it can get a bit better, he showed that there is a floor there. And as well, there was a few examples of full field reads on the tape from Mendoza, which is always great to see from a #1 pick. So the processing certainly has things to be excited about. So while all these things are awesome for Fernando Mendoza, the stature, mobility, arm talent, and accuracy, these all give him a super solid foundation to work and build upon. But his best attribute has yet to be mentioned, and it is without a doubt his attitude and work ethic towards football. Of course, everyone's seen his interviews, and those are always hilarious, and they reveal how good of a character he is. But if Mendoza is to truly succeed in the NFL and to become a top 10 quarterback, which he certainly can, it is going to be because of his attitude and work ethic. The jump he made from his junior to senior season cannot be understated, and obviously Indiana's program had a huge part in that, but so did Mendoza. And it is always a good sign when younger prospects get better every year of their college careers, and Mendoza is a great example of that. So with all these great qualities, Mendoza will come into the NFL with a decent floor and foundation to build upon. But I do think there are plenty of things Fernando Mendoza can and will have to improve upon at the NFL level in order to succeed. So transitioning into the weaknesses portion of this breakdown, we will start with his less glaring weaknesses and transition into his more glaring weaknesses as we go on. So to start off, I think his accuracy, while usually very good, doesn't mean he doesn't have his fair share of missed throws. There are plenty of deep balls to Omar Cooper and Charlie Becker that he just didn't put enough on, and he allowed the DBs to get back into the play due to his inability to put enough on it and lead his receiver downfield. As well, I think his accuracy when on the run tapers off a little bit, but he still shows plenty of good throws in that department too. Like I said, accuracy is a less glaring weakness, and it's usually pretty good, but I would be lying if I said it's always perfect. And now we get into stuff that really concerns me. And for a quarterback of his archetype, this usually is a strength, but for Mendoza, I feel he's not strong in this area at all, and that's his pure processing ability. Now, I'm not going to say Indiana babied him at all, because that's not true, but Indiana certainly did not put everything on his plate. Indiana's offense was super RPO and run game heavy, which put Mendoza in way less difficult situations as a passer, and usually when evaluating a quarterback, these things would be not that big of a deal so long as the actual drop back pass reps were still very good. The issue is the drop back pass reps from Mendoza were not very good. They were certainly more of a mixed bag than you would like. On tape for Mendoza, he almost plays a super robotic in a way. And what I mean is, especially earlier in the year, there were a ton of reps where Mendoza was dropping back and either throwing his first read or dropping his head and running. And this happened less as the season went on. I feel like there were obviously plenty of examples of Mendoza going through his reads for sure, but what I felt stayed with Mendoza throughout the season was him sticking to that first read for a little bit too long or forcing it to that read when it was not there. Overall, Mendoza takes pretty good care of the ball, but he's also got his fair share of bad reads on tape. And again, something that isn't usually a problem for a quarterback with his size is there are way too many missed reads over the field from Mendoza, like way too many. Especially in the Old Dominion game, which I know was his first game with the Hoosiers, but he was still missing tons of open plays downfield and over the middle. And if you watch his highlights, most of his best plays come either outside the numbers or deep down the field. For a pocket passer type who are usually good at working the middle of the field, Mendoza simply doesn't do that. And if you remember back to Jaden Daniels coming out of LSU, a lot of people had this same criticism, but looking back, that was more Daniels wasn't asked to work the middle of the field because of the talent LSU had at the wide receiver position. With Mendoza, I feel like the offense, while definitely asking him to throw outside, certainly asked him to throw a good amount over the middle, and a lot of times Mendoza just wasn't seeing it. And if he cannot get better in this area of the field, I have a hard time seeing him becoming a very good quarterback in the NFL, because the middle of the field is the most important area of the field to attack for NFL offenses. So that's a huge concern with me for Mendoza, and he has the work ethic in mind to get better at this for sure, but it must improve for him to become a top NFL quarterback. And finally, the last big weakness I have for Mendoza is his pocket management. This became a big weakness for me, especially when watching the Ohio State and national title games. Now, I know Indiana's offensive line wasn't the best unit in college football, but let's not act like Mendoza wasn't kept very clean all season long. He absolutely saw his fair share of clean pockets. And when Indiana went into these games where the offensive line couldn't hold up, you saw Mendoza start to lose where he was in the pocket. It just felt like when that pressure got in, he just didn't know where to go and how to escape. You watch these guys like Cam Ward, Bryce Young, and Caleb Williams recently coming out of college, knowing how to escape and where to go when the pressure gets in. And it seems like Mendoza just doesn't have that same feel. Mendoza had a 15.8% pressure to sack rate, which ranked 102nd in all of college football quarterbacks. Now, while Mendoza does have some decent mobility for his size, he does not have the athleticism to outrun these defensive linemen and blitzing linebackers, so he needs to be a surgeon in the pocket, and I just didn't see that. He, again, couldn't figure out where to go when the pressure got in, and he didn't have a quick option, and I also thought he could have seen blitzes and got to quick throws when he was hot better. Now, I think Mendoza's pocket presence is overall pretty good. There are some real good throws on tape where he has pressure in his face and he still steps into his throw while getting hit, although he can still improve there too. But Mendoza's toughness has never been a question. I just don't know if he has the pocket awareness and feel in the pocket to survive NFL pass rushes. So wrapping up my thoughts on Mendoza here, we all know the landing spot he's going to. The Raiders will without a doubt take Mendoza number 1 overall to be their franchise quarterback. So how do I see his NFL career playing out? Well, obviously nobody knows for certain, but I believe he has a chance to be a starter in the NFL for the next 10 plus years. But I do believe there is a chance he just ends up not being cut out for being a starter in the league. And I think his first year in the league will be a pretty big struggle for Mendoza. He has to transition from an Indiana team that was heavy into RPO and run game as an offensive structure, had a very solid offensive line, had NFL talent all over the receiving room, and had the best defense in college football to back it up. And then Mendoza walks into the Raiders with a poor offensive line, a terrible receiving group outside of Brock Bowers, and an already not great defense that will most likely be trading Max Crosby. If the Raiders don't do a lot in free agency to put solid pieces around Mendoza, it could get pretty ugly year one, like Trevor Lawrence and Bryce Young rookie year bad. But obviously both those guys have turned their careers around, and even if Mendoza has a bad rookie year in the league, it's no reason to panic. But if he is to continue to get better, the processing needs to become more consistent, and he must get a better feel in the pocket, or he will absolutely crumble behind that Raiders team. And like I said earlier, if he's to become successful and become an above average NFL quarterback, it'll be because of his work ethic. So I do think it'll be hard to count Mendoza out in the NFL, but I do think he isn't there yet. Also, as an Indiana native myself, I'll definitely be rooting for him to improve and take that next step to become a true franchise changer. So anyway, my final grade for Fernando Mendoza is an 8.4. For reference, my grades on the top QBs in the last 2 years were an 8.8 on Cam Ward and a 9.7 on Caleb Williams. So in terms of number 1 overall quarterbacks, I have Mendoza as one of the weaker prospects, but obviously that doesn't mean he'll be the worst for sure. So that was my breakdown and thoughts on Fernando Mendoza as a prospect. I think I definitely have more concerns than most about Mendoza and am not completely sold on him being a franchise quarterback in the future as of right now, but he has the tools, work ethic, and ability to prove me wrong for sure. So thank you guys for watching, and that's all for me today.